So welcome. My name is Kimberly Shoddick. I'm an assistant professor here at the NIU Libraries, and this session is on AI tools for research and productivity. So we have a lot to go over today. I'm excited to cover it all, but it is going to be sort of a surface level look at some of the tools that you have access to through Northern and also some free tools that are available to you. So I'm hoping that this will be really useful if you are completely new to AI, or if you have experimented some but are wondering how you can apply this to your literature review process. So that's what we're going to really focus on, and kind of in two different pieces today, that productivity angle and the discovery angle. To give you an idea of what it is that we are going to be doing over this next hour, we are going to give a general overview about what these technologies are, a little bit about how they work. I'm going to share an ethical framework to think about when really before and while using these tools. And then we're going to look at the tools themselves. Again, tools for productivity and those for discovery. All right, so what is it that we're talking about with AI? Now, this is a model that is adapted from AI for Education, which if you are an instructor or an educator, this is a great website that has some ideas for how to integrate AI tools into education. But they kind of frame it as this larger bubble here of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is kind of encompasses these smaller circles, which include machine learning, deep learning, and then in the center of that is generative AI. And really what we're going to be looking at today are tools that utilize generative AI to assist with the discovery of and comprehension of research and papers. So generative AI is a system of computer processes that can create new text or images or some kind of other media. There are some that are for video now, based on user prompts. So that is kind of the very basic definition. All right, so how do these generative AI chatbots and other tools know stuff? If you look at my little graphic on the right, they really don't know anything. We talk about generative AI as thinking or reasoning, but it's really just sort of guessing. So there are two processes by which we train artificial intelligence for these large language models. So LLM stands for large language model, and they are exposed to these very large data sets. So this could be websites. So in the case of ChatGPT and OpenAI, just crawling the open internet to kind of train on the way that language is used. It could be specific data sets such as books or images. And it gives it sort of a general structure and pattern for language, and also, again, images or video. So it gives it sort of this structure that teaches it how words might kind of show up. And then these are fine-tuned. So there's a secondary process that usually uses humans, so real people, to do some data labeling and customization in order to take that sort of pre-training material and those structures and fine-tune them for a specific purpose. You're also going to hear another term, which is, RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation model. And this is sort of like that fine-tuning. So in some of the examples that we're going to see, these large language models aren't just searching out across the internet for words and training just on those, but they're actually looking at a defined set of resources to answer your question or to create, whatever, to generate those words. So that is an augmented, again, that retrieval augmented generation model that we'll be seeing in the examples today. But thinking about the fact that these generative AI models are, potentially crawling the internet or looking, at published books and ingesting those to train them, what are some problems that you think there could be as a result? So here are some news stories that I pulled about some of these issues related to generative AI. There was a study that revealed there were a lot of regressive gender stereotypes in generative AI. So they were looking at sort of the outputs, and they found a lot of gender bias, homophobia, racial stereotyping. So things like, if you were in the early days of the image generators to put in, generate an image of a nurse, it would always be a woman or a white woman. So there are a lot of these biases that exist on the open internet. And a lot of these were actually trained originally with Reddit. So there's a lot of stuff in there that, it's putting together because it sees these structures and that it found on the internet, and it thinks that, and again, it's not actually thinking, but it puts together the words in that way. Now, that's where those humans come in. A lot of these companies do put in some guardrails to kind of counteract the bias. Another is, and then right below that, humans inherit the artificial intelligent biases. Not only is the output reflective of the biases that exist on the internet, but it's also feeding back to the people who are ingesting it. So people are using these generative AI tools. They're getting this kind of like biased generated feedback, reporting, knowledge, I say in quotes, and that's just kind of magnifying the biases that were already existing. So some concerns there. Some other concerns that weren't mentioned were copyright concerns. So there, for instance, the New York Times has sued a number of generative AI companies because they used their content to train their models. So there are some lawsuits pending, and a lot of this hasn't really been settled. The issue of copyright is really tricky when it comes to generative AI, because the Copyright Office has said that you can't copyright something that is AI generated, but what does it mean for stuff that has been ingested into generative AI and, suddenly sounds a lot like a New York Times article? We saw the SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, really fight against this when trying to prevent the industry from creating content that was generated or trained on their image, for instance, or their voice. Some other issues are that there are errors and hallucinations. So a few of you mentioned errors, and you'll hear the word hallucinations a lot, and I'm sure it's something you've heard before, but that is where those large language models will cite something very confidently, but that something doesn't exist. We are seeing this as librarians all the time at our research help desk when students and faculty are looking for a particular journal article, and the journal article doesn't exist because it is something that, again, some generative AI model confidently cited, but those generative AI models are just putting words together. So a few things to look out for. Now, these things are getting better in some cases, and there are some companies that are fighting against things like this final issue with generative AI, and that is the energy that is required to both train these models and to run the data centers. So there was a report recently that said, it looks like it's pretty near impossible to actually calculate how much power AI is using, but they estimated that in 2024, data centers were using about the amount of power that it takes to power the country of Thailand for a year. So, this is a concern, and you have to think of it sort of in the overall energy usage that we have in our modern day lives. So it's not just AI that's contributing to this, but other factors as well. So it's something to just take into consideration when we're looking at AI companies and sort of the models that they are pledging to to use sort of like green AI technology, or if they are training their content on stuff that is not copyright protected, they actively are fighting against these biases. These are some things to look into when you're looking at different tools to use. Now, I have this model here that I want to introduce as a way to kind of take a step back before using an AI tool in any process to consider, is this something that is going to be more helpful or more harmful? So this is peaceful use of AI. And the P stands for policies. Does using the tool comply with any laws or policies? Let's say you're in a class, you want to make sure that you read the syllabus and have an understanding of if you are able to use AI tools for various purposes. And if you're not sure, then always ask your professor. If you are an instructor, professor, and you are somebody who's publishing, you're going to want to check with your publisher and see what those editorial guidelines are on AI use and disclosure. Many publishers do have their own guidelines for when it is admissible to use AI for different purposes, whether it is, grammar or assistive AI, which is what I'll be discussing today. And in what cases you need to disclose how you used AI. Another piece is the ethics. So we talked a little bit about that with the bias piece and environment, but do that company's practices align with ethical standards and values that you value and that your profession values? Agency, this one is important to librarians. Do you retain control over your data and its use? So you want to be sure that you kind of have an understanding of, how will your data be used? Is it going to be used to train that AI platform further for others? Critical thinking, does it support rather than replace your own thinking and learning? Another issue that I didn't bring up was that there are some early studies that are showing that critical thinking is actually being harmed by students' overuse of generative AI. So it's something that you want to take a step back and say, is this something that is helping me grow, or am I replacing this for a thought process? And then environmental concerns. Do the benefits justify the environmental impact? And that's a really tough one because it is hard. It's hard to know. But for that one, what I like to think about is, is this sort of frivolous use? Is this something I could have very easily and quickly done without this tool? Or is this something that is going to make some sort of impact? All right, so now that we have that general framework and thinking about how to use generative AI, we're going to jump into the planning phase. So I like to think of generative AI tools as really useful for kind of that like initial stage, that brainstorming, and it can help you do things like refining your research questions, developing strategies for research, planning a research timeline, and breaking down tasks. So some of that executive functioning kind of stuff that's related to the research process can be really useful for something like generative AI. Two of the tools that I'm going to talk about are going to be Microsoft Co-Pilot and Goblin tools. The reason that I am introducing Microsoft Co-Pilot is that our institution subscribes to Microsoft Copilot. It has commercial data protection when you access it via your NIU credentials. So that's the reason that I'm choosing that over something like ChatGPT. So Microsoft Copilot, you can chat with text, voice, and image. Right now it is GPT-4, but you can try out GPT-5, and that will be the model that it uses in the future. And for image generation, it's DALL-E 3. It uses something called web grounding. This is web searching in order to provide relevant information. So it is grounding how it responds in a web search. Instead of some models, free models of ChatGPT, where it has ingested what is crawled over the web previously and might not have new information. This is using web searches to then generate text. And again, it has that commercial data protection. How can you use Microsoft Copilot in a research process? There is a prompt generation model that is actually Microsoft Co-Pilot recommends, and it is goal, context, expectations, and source. I'm going to walk through each of these and give you an example of how these can be used in a research context. And the most important one, and the one that is really required out of all of these, is goal. So goal would be, what do you want it to do? So in the case of having it refine a research question for you, let's say you're just starting out in your research and you're not exactly sure where you want to go with your research, you can tell it to refine your research question. That is your goal. You want it to refine your research question. And then the next step is to give it more context. And that's the so that. What is the context? Why do you need this research question? And then third is expectations. So are there any parameters involved in the output that it provides? And then finally, if there are any sources that you want it to be grounded in, you can actually provide it that source, whether that's uploading a PDF, giving it a website, so it is grounded in a particular source. An example of what that might look like is, let's say you start out and you know that you're interested in women's fashion and World War II. So your initial question is, refine my research question. That's the goal. And your research question is, how did women's fashion change during World War II? The context for this hypothetical is so that I can begin research for a 10-page paper requiring use of primary and secondary sources. So giving it as much contextual information as you can to help it do its job. And then expectations. In this one, the examples should be a mix of more broad and more narrow research questions, but it should relate to women in World War II. And then I did not have a particular source that I wanted it to use. So let's see what the output was for this. No need to read through all of this, but it gave me 3 different categories here. It gave me broader research questions, moderately focused research questions, and narrower research questions. In this, it is considering my context, so that it's going to be for a paper, that I'm going to need primary and secondary sources, and it is meeting those expectations of some are more broad, some are narrow. And this is a way to just sort of get an idea of different directions you can go in if you're early in your research stage. After reading through some of these examples, I took one and edited it down to more what I was interested in. And we'll go look at that process in just a minute. You don't want to just kind of go, okay, pick one of these, copy and paste. You still want the human element and you in that process. But take a minute. So there are a lot of ways that you can prompt to get some research ideas. Okay, so what I did was I looked at the output and I said, you know what, I'm really interested in this idea that it gave me of female factory workers and the normalization of trousers in women's fashion. At that point, you want to put yourself, the human element, back into the research process and make sure that it is you that is leading that research process. I saw that as an idea from Co-Pilot, and after doing a little bit more research on Rosie the Riveteer and doing some background research, I saw this really interesting Cornell University Library exhibit about Rosie the Riveteer and learned that it was often Black women working in the factories. And so after doing a little bit more background research, I then further revised that research question to how did the experiences of Black women in wartime industrial roles during World War II challenge or reinforce fashion norms? You can see that we're using it as a tool, but we are still in the driver's seat. Another way that we can use generative AI is, once we have our research question, is to help us come up with a strategy. Now, again, this is just one tool in our toolbox. There are, if you are a student, you have a subject specialist librarian who will be more than happy to meet with you and come up with this research strategy. but it could be useful before that meeting to kind of do some digging around on your own. So in this case, I asked Microsoft Co-Pilot, given this research question, this how did the experiences of Black women in wartime industrial roles, and I asked it to come up with sort of a strategy. And it gave me a strategy of starting with some background reading, looking for secondary sources, primary sources, looking at our archives. So it just is giving me a path forward. But again, this is just a tool, and it's to spark some ideas of how, if you're feeling stuck, of how you can get unstuck. Another tool that does a similar kind of thing that I really like is Goblin Tools. I'm going to put the link in the chat in case if folks aren't familiar. Has anybody used Goblin Tools before? I actually found out about Goblin Tools from a faculty member here. A few years ago, we had a panel on neurodivergent students and faculty and staff, and a faculty member talked about using Goblin Tools. I happen to have ADHD. This was created for people who are neurodivergent. So it does all sorts of things now, but really it was originally created to break tasks down. So what you can do is in that search bar, in that add a new item, if you go to the magic to do in Goblin Tools, you can put something like, in my example here, I have help me plan how to research and write a 10-page research paper that will use primary and secondary sources. So let's say I have this assignment prompt and I'm feeling very overwhelmed by it. You can put that in, and Magic To Do will break it down into discrete tasks for you that you can actually check off. You'll also see those little chili peppers, and it's totally free to use. They do have, there are some apps. This is like an open source tool. And so people have created apps that you can use on your phone that are, I think one of them is $1.99. But I would just go to the website, goblin.tools, and completely free. And the person who, going back to the ethics, the person who created it is committed to using AI ethically. And right now, I believe it uses OpenAI as sort of its source data, but it's looking at other models. So that those chili peppers are the spiciness levels. If you are neurodivergent, you may say that you are neurospicy. And if you're feeling spicy, that means that you're feeling like a little extra, like you need a little extra help with this. So you can put in how many chili peppers you're feeling. If you're feeling like you really need a lot of help with this, you can increase the chili pepper amount, and it'll really break that task down for you. It does all sorts of other things. It's great it can tell you sort of like read the tone of an email, which again, for neurodivergent folks, can maybe misread tone. So there are a lot of other tools in here to look at, but for research, I think it's really great for breaking down those complex tasks. Again, it's a great tool for that executive functioning piece. So those are sort of those early planning stage tools, Microsoft Co-Pilot for coming up with research questions and strategies, and Goblin Tools for breaking down those complex processes involved in research. And I'm going to move on in the second half to discovery tools. So these are things that will help you find research. So we're going to talk about these, I'll call them assistive AI tools. They're still generative AI, but they are assisting you in completing a number of tasks. And those could be to find sources related to your research question, to discover connections between those sources, and also to summarize concepts. I'm focusing on 3 different tools today. There are many tools. The reason that I'm focusing on these 3 is because they are free. Elicit does have a paid version if you really wanted to do fancy things, but for the most part, these are free. These are open source or built on open source, and I find that they are just, again, useful tools in the research tool belt. These are not tools that our library subscribes to. They are just available online. Semantic Scholar is the first one that I'll talk about. And that is sort of like Google Scholar, but it does a couple more things. So it's an AI-powered search tool, and it indexes millions of academic papers, but it does some cool things with those papers and the discovery of them. And then we're going to talk about Research Rabbit, which is a way to kind of, again, discover research, but also do that visually. And then Elicit, which summarizes and compares research using a matrix. And I'll show you some examples of that. This is all built on Semantic Scholar. So Research Rabbit and Elicit use Semantic Scholar's database of sources as their grounding tool, basically. So they're looking, instead of just generating words, they're actually looking at the research that they are able to get through Semantic Scholar. Semantic Scholar, again, is that AI-powered search engine. It's been around for over 10 years. So we think about AI as being more recent, but this has been around for a while. And this was developed by a nonprofit, and it's an open tool that actually shares its code publicly. So that's why we see these other tools that are kind of building off of the corpus of Semantic Scholar. What it does is it indexes content from the web and certain publishers. So it's kind of like Google Scholar in that it crawls the web and publisher websites looking for metadata and information like authors and titles, abstracts, things like that. But it also has partnerships with a lot of different academic publishers to get more data, to get some full text in some cases. But like Google Scholar, not everything you find in it will be full text. So if you're familiar with using Google Scholar through our library, you can actually connect it to the library, and that way you can very easily request items that you find in Google Scholar. In Semantic Scholar, we don't have that connection at this point, but I think that's something maybe in the future to look for. But that's okay. If Semantic Scholar finds an article that you really want to read, you're just going to copy the article information and search on our library website, and we'll either have a copy of that article for you, or you can request a copy, and we'll get that to you digitally and free to you. So a couple of things about Semantic Scholar is that it is kind of more specific to science, technology, math, as well as some of the social sciences and humanities. So it is interdisciplinary, but it's not going to have everything. It has these TLDR summaries. So it's a good way to kind of very quickly look over papers and figure, is this something that might be useful for my research? It rather than just using the abstract, it kind of summarizes the key point of the article in what they call a TLDR, which stands for too long, didn't read. So this is what the interface looks like when you go to Semantic Scholar. It is just a very simple search bar, and you can type in your research question or your keywords. You can type in an author's name, the name of a specific paper, a journal. It is more forgiving than library databases as far as the language that you use to search. Now, one of the drawbacks about using tools like this is that they're not as powerful and precise as library databases, because library databases are using this really controlled vocabulary. But the plus side is that it is fairly easy to search. So here are some things that it does. So let's say you search for a paper, or you search using, some keywords. You're searching for, let's see, I think this was artificial intelligence and student success. I think that was the search that I did. One thing that it does, after you do your search, you'll get a list of articles. Again, it's not going to be every article that's ever been published. It's things that it was able to find on the open web and through publisher agreements. So not everything, but there are quite a few. And it will give you these citation types here. So this article here, it has 10 highly influential citations, 61 background citations, 6 method, and 1 result. What that means is that this particular paper was used by 10, it was cited by 10 other very highly influential papers. It was used to support the background in 61 other papers. It was used in the methods section of 6 other papers and results in 1. And now this is just the papers that it has in its corpus. So it's, again, not complete, but it is a way that you can then kind of do what is called citation chaining. So citation chaining refers to a research technique where you follow the works that a paper has cited and those that have cited the paper. So they really enhance this process by using AI to determine how that paper is being cited. So normally, let's say you're in Google Scholar or one of our library databases, you might be able to see this article was cited by, and then you can look at those articles. Well, this goes a step further by saying how it was cited. So that's where you get that background citation, methods, results, or highly influential citations. So you have to remember that these don't have access to the full text from all publishers, so it's going to miss some research. But it provides you with a path either forward or backward. If you do find an article that is really supportive of the research that you're trying to do, this is a way that you can then find related research. Another thing that it does, and this is in beta mode right now, is it has, for some articles in which it has the full text and it has publisher agreements, there's this thing called Semantic Reader. This is a PDF reader that gives you, that highlights the different sections of the paper for you, the kind of relevant bits and pieces. It goes through and it looks for the most important pieces and then labels them. So it's a little bit hard to see in here, but it has these labels: method, results, goal, and this helps to kind of skim an article. It's a way that you can easily kind of skim through research papers to determine if they are going to be useful for your research or not. This is not sort of an excuse for not reading a full paper that you might want to use in your research, but it can be helpful in determining what to use and what to kind of skip over. All right, I'm going to hop over to Research Rabbit because we do have 2 more tools to look at still. Research Rabbit it's a tool that you can use to discover research, create collections. You discover research through related authors and related papers. And again, it helps you visualize those connections, and it syncs with my favorite citation management tool, Zotero. This is kind of, again, built off of the corpus of Semantic Scholar. So again, it's going to be limited. It's not going to give you the research, all the research that we have, for instance, in our library databases. What Research Rabbit, it's got a little bit of a messy interface, in my opinion. It's got these 3 panes that I'll explain what each one is. The first one on the left is where you put your collections. Collections are different projects that you might be working on. If you're a user of Zotero, this will sound kind of familiar. In this example, I have a couple of different categories. One is library, one is video games, and then within those categories, I have some discrete collections. So my own publications and some articles that I found about the first year experience. And the ones that have the little Z next to them, I've imported those directly using Zotero. So if you're a Zotero user, you can go into the settings in Research Rabbit and connect it to your Zotero account, and you can then import whole collections right into this. Now it's only going to import the ones that it has in Semantic Scholar. So like my publications, for instance, in Zotero, I have like 20, but it was only able to match 9 because, again, the limitation of Semantic Scholar. The second pane is just going to be those individual articles. So right here I have, I'm clicked on the first year experience, FYE, and then in the middle pane, we see the articles that are in that collection. And then if you click on the green add papers, that is where you can do the searching, kind of like in Semantic Scholar, to find additional research. On the right is where it gets really interesting. So this is the power of Research Rabbit. You can click on a collection, and then over to the right, you can explore similar works, earlier works, authors, kind of related authors. So you can see that even though I have only, I think, 8 articles in that first year experience, it found 973 similar works. So I can click on that, and when I do, I get this. And this is where things get a little messy. It just keeps opening up windows. It's a little bit hard to see here, but I have this diagram of articles and how they are related to one another. So I clicked on that, that 973 articles, and they pop up there, the similar work. I can then click on those and add them to that collection. And I can also see how they're related on the right there. And I actually do have a bigger example of this, zoomed in a little bit. So the blue circles, those are papers that are new to me. I don't have them in my collection yet. The green ones already exist in my collection. And the lines between those are when one cites another one, they connect. So you can see that some of them are very connected to each other. Some are just out there on their own. They weren't cited by anyone, and they didn't cite anyone else in that collection. You can actually move those little circles around. I don't know why, but you can. So if you're a visual learner and you like to think about connections and you want to explore kind of similar work or similar authors, this might be a good tool for you. Or if you're a Zotero user, because again, just connects right to Zotero. All right, and I'm going to wrap up with Elicit, which takes things one step further and a step to where I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And that is, this is a tool that, again, is building off of Semantic Scholar, the corpus of Semantic Scholar, but it's asking questions, and it's reorganizing and summarizing the research results that you get. So it can help you do things like strengthen queries and questions. It can generate reports, but the free version, it can only generate a report based on, it'll look at 50 sources and then use up to 10 sources in the report. And you can actually chat with the report, just like ChatGPT. So the grounding that it does, it's grounded in those research results, and you're actually chatting with that research. So it could be a way to better understand the research that you're collecting. So how this works, to build better queries or sort of strategies for how to research and find sources, you can start by typing in your research question, and it will judge how good of a research question it thinks it is. So this said, good research question, maybe consider though adding one of these elements. And I think it's population specificity, a comparative approach, intervention details. So it's saying it's a good start for a research question, but maybe go a little bit further. So I clicked on population specificity, and it changed my research question. It added another element to it. And then it said, great, great job. So now my research question is, what is the impact of educational technology on literacy rates among elementary school students in low-income urban districts? So this, kind of like Co-Pilot, is another way that you can kind of brainstorm research questions. Once you have a research question that is to your liking, then you click that arrow, and then it's doing that search within the Semantic Scholar corpus to find results. Now, what is interesting about this is that you can have it generate a report based on those results. Again, it will look at 50 results, and then it will choose what it thinks. Again, it's not actually thinking, but it'll choose the 10 best results and kind of summarize them together in a report. So here's this report that it created for me. This is looking at those 10 sources. So this is grounded in actual sources. These are not hallucinations. And with that report, I can actually chat with it. On the right-hand side is a little chat box, and I ask the report, what technologies are the most impactful? So it created this report about educational technology, and I want to know, okay, but which technologies specifically? And it chats back with you. It looks at the report and it gives you citations for its reasoning as well. So this is a way, again, to better understand some different topic areas. But word of caution that this is the machine. So you always want to actually go back and read those articles and do searching beyond these AI tools. Final thing it can do, actually two final things, is it can actually put things into a chart to kind of compare those top 10 results. So here are 10 results, and it's given me a little chart comparing all of these different elements. And you can actually specify which elements it compares. So another great way to kind of parse out research. Finally, it claims to be able to do systematic reviews, which are very labor-intensive ways of looking for scholarly research and under very specific parameters. I will say that researchers have found that it is prone to error, and the systematic review process is one that is very careful to be error-free. So while it is a good tool to potentially use to, again, get some ideas and do some exploration, it's not something that I would recommend to actually do a systematic review with. There are other AI tools out there that claim to do systematic reviews, but I think that, it's important to understand that systematic reviews have a human and multiple human elements, and that's an important part of that process. All right, we just have 2 minutes, so very quickly, the library is currently looking at different AI tools within our databases, so you're probably going to see some of these soon pop up. Some of the ones that I've been talking about, those are external tools, but our library research databases can do similar things, and we're testing those features out right now. One that is currently turned on is for ebooks. Anything that is a ProQuest ebook, you're going to see this thing called Research Assistant on the right. What this will do is we'll give you summaries and key points for different chapters. But again, it's not a replacement for actually reading the text. So I want to caution you there. And I also want to remind you of this peaceful framework to consider the policies, the ethics, your own agency, its impact on your critical thinking, and the environmental impact before you use any of these tools. So thank you so much. I will stick around for a few minutes if there are questions, but I will be doing more webinars like this with deeper dives into some of these tools in the future.